Good afternoon. Welcome to CSBA's webinar, High Quality Professional Development for Mathematics Instruction. We greatly appreciate you taking the time today to join us for this conversation about how boards and governance teams can support ensuring that there is high quality professional development as folks work on improving mathematics instructional quality within their LEAs. This webinar today is brought to you by the Gates Foundation grant. We greatly appreciate their support. And it is part of a larger project that CSBA is doing to support boards. We'll share more resources as we progress. But before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. First, we're going to go through our agenda for the day, which includes our housekeeping portion, introductions, as well as a panel discussion facilitated by Efrain Mercado and a Q&A. This is going to be available to you through the window at the bottom of your Zoom bar that says Q&A. Please use that feature to submit your questions. It's located on the ribbon below the speaker. The chat feature has been disabled for this webinar. Your questions will be answered either within the Q&A feature in writing or live by our presenters. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, and we appreciate your patience. All attendees will receive a link to this video recording as well as resources in a follow-up email after the webinar. So to begin, I'd like to ask our esteemed panelists to turn on their cameras. We're going to do a brief introduction. We're very grateful for those who are taking the time to share their knowledge of the system today. To begin is Linda Darling-Hammond. Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond is the president and CEO of the Learning Policy Institute. She is also the Charles E. Ducommun Professor of Education Emeritus at Stanford University. Dr. Darling-Hammond currently serves as the president of California's State Board of Education. Joining us as well is panelist Dr. Kyndall Brown. Dr. Brown was a secondary mathematics teacher for 13 years and has been a professional development provider for schools and districts in LA County for over 25 years. Dr. Brown holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics, master's degrees in computer-based education and mathematics education, and a PhD in education. He is currently the executive director of the California Mathematics Project, which you'll be hearing a little bit about today. Also on our panel is Ellen Barger, who is the Associate Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction for the Santa Barbara County Education Office. She has chaired the Mathematics Subcommittee of the Curricular and Improvement Support Committee for a decade. Ellen is the Mathematics Content Lead for the California Mathematics Science and Computer Science Partnership Grant, building a statewide network of local communities of practice to improve instruction in those content areas. Additionally, we are appreciative of our panelist, Erin Carter, who is here today, particularly supporting our rural school districts. Erin Carter has dedicated 29 years to advancing learning and instructional excellence and has a strong foundation in early childhood education, particularly supporting students from TK through second grade. He serves as the Senior Director of Teaching and Learning at the Lake County Office of Education, where he leads initiatives like the Learning Acceleration Rural Math Collaborative. And with the board perspective on our panel today, we are grateful to be joined by Makai Ali. Makai is the president of the Compton Unified School District Board of Trustees, upon which he has served since 2007. Makai is national chair-elect of the National Black Council of School Board Members and is the founder of the California Association of Black School Educators. Mr. Ali is the longest serving president in the history of the Compton Unified School District. And we'll hear about the work that they've been doing in professional learning and the success that they've seen during our panel today. And our facilitator this afternoon is Efrain Mercado Jr., who is the director of the California Policy and Senior Policy Advisor at the Learning Policy Institute, supporting work related to policy issues in California and assessment and accountability issues at the federal level. Mercado previously served as the Senior Policy Director for the California County Superintendent's Educational Services Association and supported the Common Core state standards at the National Association for the State Boards of Education and ASCD. So again, as you see, we have an esteemed panel joining us today, but I'd like to begin with a presentation by Dr. Darling Hammond, who collaborated with CSBA in co-authoring a piece on high quality professional development. And she'll be talking about that subject in her discussion today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I worked on this document, which I'm sure will be made available to everyone with Larkin Willis. So I want to acknowledge her. I think we're going to move the slides to the next slide. And the question was, how can we be sure that as the new mathematics framework rolls out in California, teachers and school leaders have access to high quality professional development that is aligned with that new framework? You can go to the next slide. So first of all, there are a lot of instructional changes that are implied by the new mathematics framework. And those are going to require some deep learning, and in some cases, perhaps even a little unlearning from the ways in which math may have been taught before. I want to put this in a context, first of all, that mathematics has been a challenge in the United States for a long time. We are a nation that performs on the PISA exams internationally, well below the averages. Somebody's got a
Yes, thank you.
And California has been, although making some gains in recent years, below the national average. So we have a country that is math phobic quite often. And the way in which we teach math is different than the way that high achieving nations in the world teach mathematics. So those changes in the mathematics framework are derived from our research on what do high achieving and equitable nations in the world do in terms of mathematics. What it involves is moving away from more of an algorithmic or rote approach to memorizing math facts or doing calculations to a deeper understanding of the math concepts, which means often you taking one problem and going deeply into it from multiple angles rather than just applying an algorithm to a whole set of problems that you may not deeply understand. It means moving away from the disconnected standards in the Common Core standards that were adopted in California to aggregating those standards into big ideas that integrate and draw connections between math concepts. I will say one of the big differences between the teaching of math in the US and in other countries is that quite often they only treat a small number of concepts each year. In Japan and Korea and Estonia, you might have 5 or 6 big ideas that guide the math teaching for an entire school year. Ratio, proportion, the definition of integer, for example, rather than 32 standards to get through more superficially. So it's very important that we integrate those and we teach to those big ideas so that students can deeply understand them. Engaging learners in open-ended tasks and multidimensional tasks that develop their inquiry and problem-solving skills. And then finally, grounding instruction in data use and real-world examples. All of the highest achieving countries in the world brought data literacy and data science into their mathematics curriculum frameworks over the last 2 or 3 decades. And we are beginning to increasingly do that now in California, and that's part of the framework as well. When kids can see how math is used in the real world, when they can use math to answer real questions that they have, it's both motivating and educative. The next slide. So we also talk in the framework a lot about multiple pathways to math equity. That means powerful instruction in the classroom and more access to that, incorporating what we know about teaching students in a variety of ways, teaching English learners. We also need skilled instruction and differentiated supports that may go beyond the classroom and that may call on school administrators to organize additional supports such as translation opportunities, tutoring outside the classroom, during lunchtime, after school, during lab sessions, lab courses attached to algebra, geometry, or Math 1, Math 2, Math 3 courses that allow anybody in the class to get additional help to stay caught up. And then summer learning. And we know that we had a lot of fallback during the pandemic. And so students have gaps in their learning, and we have to think about the places and the ways in which we will help them fill some of those gaps, even as they're moving ahead with grade level learning. Next slide. So the Learning Policy Institute was asked to do this analysis in part because we've studied effective professional development. Earlier, we published a piece that looked at the kind of professional development that has been demonstrated to both change teachers' practices and to promote student achievement gains. And it has basically 7 features. It's grounded in the math content and how to teach it. Teachers may revisit the content as well as the multiple ways they can teach that particular content. Incorporates active learning. Teachers may be developing curriculum. They may be developing lessons together. They may be collaborating in a variety of ways to give each other feedback as well as to develop learning opportunities. It models effective practices. Teachers may get opportunities to see effective teachers teaching, as well as looking at curriculum units, looking at lesson plans, looking at varieties of models that they can adapt for their own classroom. It provides coaching and expert support, which is very critical because we don't learn changes in practices by just getting a workshop after school one day or an introduction to the new materials that maybe have been adopted, but by getting ongoing opportunities for coaching around lesson planning, lesson study, as well as instructional practice. Opportunities for reflection and feedback. After each of these opportunities for learning, we have to think about, okay, what might that mean for my classroom, for my students, to reflect on what I've done, what was successful, what might need more development. And then, of course, sustained duration. It's not a one and done. It occurs over time. Again, this is where having math coaching in the district can be so important. Next slide. So then there are a number of conditions and policies that are going to be important to ensure that your staff receive the kind of math professional learning that is useful to them. One is to develop an instructional vision that everyone shares on the board, in the administration, and teachers. So everyone is trying to move together in the common direction. Building that within district expertise, the math advisors and the coaches, the teachers who can get additional supports to be able to work with their colleagues. Choosing evidence-based approaches like the ones that I just described, and then implementing that professional learning, ensuring the time, high quality instructional materials, and providing that leadership so that there is an incentive and a set of supports for teachers. I want to tell one little story that was in the math framework from a study where there's been a discussion, for example, about accelerating math in 8th grade so that students can start high school math 1, 2, and 3, or algebra, geometry, algebra 2, can start on that in 8th grade and middle school. And we included a study of a school, a very diverse school, that had done that successfully for all of its students in New York, actually, teaching the sequential math 1, 2, and 3. But what they had done was they had found a way for all of the teachers to look at the 6th and 7th grade curriculum to make sure there wouldn't be any gaps when they got to the accelerated 8th grade curriculum. They then did professional learning and professional collaboration planning time for those teachers, and then added a lab course to the 8th grade course so that anybody could get extra help 2 days a week. And there was time set aside for that, as well as the planning time for the teachers. And then in this very substantial school teaching a diverse set of learners, there was a very high success rate, and 100% of those students passed the Regents test a year early by virtue of this very purposeful approach. So I just urge you to think about all the elements that may be needed to accomplish the goals that you're setting for math achievement in your district. Next slide. We do a lot in California, and we will be doing more to support math professional learning. The California Math Project, you'll hear from Kyndall Brown in just a few minutes, has 19 regional sites and provides professional learning opportunities, both for coaches and administrators, as well as for teachers. The California Math, Science, and Computer Science Partnership, and you'll hear from Ellen Barger in just a few minutes, also supports and connects a lot of the professional development across the state. We have an early math initiative for preschool through the early grades. There are learning acceleration system projects that are devoted to math supports. There's a rural math collaborative, and then the California Collaborative for Excellence in Education has a system of support and lists and connects you to all of these resources. So we hope you'll take advantage of those. Next slide. I'm going to pass the ball to Efrain Mercado, who is going to help us both with Q&A and panel discussion.
Thank you, Linda. Really appreciate it. Can the panelists please come on screen now? All my good friends here. Thank you so much. We're going to start off with a question for Kyndall, and then folks, please feel free to chime in if you have thoughts to add to it, and we'll kind of roll from there. So Kyndall, as Linda mentioned in the presentation, the California Math Project has played a key role in the development of not only the new math framework, but the rollout of professional development across our state. How are you as a state leader just thinking about that work, especially with your 19 math project sites?
So thank you for the question. So, the California Mathematics Project, each of our 19 sites brings together research mathematicians, mathematics educators, and classroom teacher leaders to put on professional development programs that are really focused on building teachers' content knowledge in terms of the content they are teaching, providing them with pedagogical strategies, and then also building a cadre of leadership within the state. And so our professional development for all of the different groups of teachers, coaches, TOSAs, and administrators, a lot of it is focused on engaging these different constituencies in the kinds of mathematics in the ways that the framework is asking them to do, because many of us didn't get a chance to engage in mathematics that way as a student. And so it's important for them to understand that way they're learning the pedagogy, they're learning the content at the same time. In addition to that, what we layer on then for coaches, what are the best research-based pedagogical strategies that they can use to support the teachers that they work with? And in addition to that, we want to layer on for administrators, what are the kinds of supports that they're going to need to give teachers to be able to teach in this way in terms of time, resources, so that they have an opportunity to collaborate with one another, observe each other teaching, look at and analyze student work. In terms of the kinds of professional development that we have been doing to specifically support the framework, a lot of our work has really been introducing teachers to the 3 dimensions of systemic change that are laid out in Chapter 2 of the framework, which are an assets-based approach to instruction, understanding that all students are coming to school with assets, with knowledge that we can build on to help them learn mathematics at a deeper level. Active engagement through investigation and connection, which I think Professor Darling Hammond laid out really well. And then cultural and personal relevance. We believe that all people, all cultures engage in mathematics in many different kinds of ways, whether it's through commerce, whether it's through cultural expression. And it's important for teachers to be able to recognize those forms of mathematical thinking and make connections to the content that they're trying to teach. In addition to that, the framework also emphasizes the 5 components of equitable and engaging teaching for all students. And there are 5 of them. I won't go over all of them, but one of the ones that we really try to emphasize is teaching towards social justice, helping students understand that mathematics can be used to help improve their world, their communities, their lives, right? And in terms of professional development models, one of the models that is called out in the framework is lesson study. And lesson study is something that some of our math project sites have been involved in since the 90s, but more specifically, the entire project, statewide project, has been involved in lesson study through CANME, the California Action Network for Mathematics Excellence and Equity. And the framework specifically calls out our equity-focused lesson study, and there's even a vignette that we wrote. And we feel like that is a lesson study is an opportunity that really puts professional learning in the hands of teachers, where they have an opportunity to do all the things that Dr. Darling-Hammond talked about, collaborate with one another, co-teach, observe each other's teaching, give each other feedback, and then engage in cycles of improvement to make math instruction better for all students. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Kyndall. Really appreciate that. I mean, it sounds like a lot of the work that you all are doing is really hitting all the tenets of what Linda called out, with especially the sustained and continued in those pieces. I'm going to pivot over to Ellen. Ellen, with your role not only at Santa Barbara County Education Office, but also as one of the co-leads for the California Math Science and Computer Science Partnership. Can you kind of describe what that partnership is and how it's structured, and how you kind of the theory of action of how it's going to roll out and actually support districts across the state to implement the framework?
Yes, thank you. And I'm really glad to go after Kyndall, because he's been a big part of the CalMSCS as well. And so the California Math Science Computer Science Partnership, we designed this partnership to build a statewide infrastructure for professional learning and practice in the 3 content areas, math, science, computer science. And I'll focus on the design for mathematics specifically, even though we know that it's a lot of the same people teaching all 3 of those subjects and leading those subjects. So structurally, previously, a lot of initiatives and grants often had a regional structure that would dispense professional learning sort of as a waterfall model across the state, but it wasn't always dispersed equally. And we knew that in order to make the kinds of changes that Dr. Darling-Hammond is talking about, especially the unlearning, we knew that we had to build capacity in each and every county in California and each and every community if we really want to see sustainable learning. And so our approach is twofold. In building this, it's both statewide and local. We're balancing the statewide equitable access to professional learning content, to research, to the conversations that are all grounded in the California Math Framework. And Kyndall just shared our starting places, the 3 dimensions and the 5 components. We know that all educators need that professional development, but we also understand, and here's where the balance comes in, that in our diverse state, what is the needs, the context, the delivery method, they're going to be very different in Compton than they are in Lake County. We have so many common needs for our students and for our teachers, but the contexts are so different. And therefore, we had to fund the development of local communities of practice. So we have the statewide and the local. And those local communities are absolutely essential, not only to the effectiveness that Dr. Darling Hammond described, but also to the sustainability of professional learning. Just from off the top figures, probably somewhere about 180,000 teachers in California have responsibility for mathematics. And every principal, every school district also does as well. And the turnover in both teachers and administrators is great. So those local communities of practice are absolutely essential to building local leadership, collective knowledge, and responding to the needs and conditions in each of our diverse communities. Another structural feature that we built into CalMSCS, specific to mathematics, is the fact that we know that districts suffer from initiative overload. I don't have to tell this audience. And that's in general, but it's especially true post-pandemic. And what we know is that many of you are already working on mathematics through a variety of ways, whether it's through the learning acceleration processes, which Erin will talk a little bit more about, specifically the Rural Math Collaborative, but also through differentiated assistance, perhaps through a grant, and through some of the deeply embedded work of the California Math Project, or some other initiative that's funded by local, state, or even with the community. And so all of our counties have promising, engaging professional learning already happening. So one of the goals of this is the coordination and the coherence. And so that's why the Rural Math Collaborative is part of CalMSCS. It's why the California Math Project is a leader in CalMSCS. Dr. Darling Hammond talked about the Early Math Initiative, which is now called Count, Play, Explore. And they are key to this because we're trying to create that coherence. So we've partnered with all of these to both roll out the framework, but more importantly, to roll it in. We're rolling it in to the initiatives and to the work that's already happening. And so to do this, we provided funding and coaching for every single county to engage in asset mapping, initiative inventories, creating local action plans, receiving coaching around those local action plans, and to support a leadership team to take part in our statewide COPs, which we have one next week, where everyone's coming together. And once again, we're grounded in the California Math Framework with our steering team providing the professional learning to each of those local teams who are then informing the needs, and that cycle of that infrastructure is really allowing us to build something that is sustainable and that brings all of these other initiatives together. And so our goals of expanding existing statewide infrastructure and capacity for professional learning and coaching in mathematics in grades 4 through 12 is also working with Count, Play, Explore for that seamless support for birth through grade 12. We are generating and disseminating professional learning opportunities across, but also related to the local needs and within the local structures. And then finally, what's specific to this grant is really supporting those local efforts to improve family and community engagement in math science and computer science education, because a huge part of activating all the things that Kyndall just talked about is really building on the assets within our communities, within our families, and making this work something that we all do together.
Thank you, Alan. It really sounds like an all hands on deck approach right now is what we need and to accomplish what Kyndall is calling out, especially the idea that it shouldn't matter whether you're in Los Angeles County, Modoc, Lake, Imperial, Alpine. How do we get access to this? I really appreciate that. I think that's a great pivot over to Erin from the Rural Math Collaborative. And I know there's a lot of effort right now to get support where everyone is in a very local context, but we also know that historically, a majority of professional development has been more urban centered, just because of numbers and more the economy of scale for whether it's a vendor or a provider or whatever it may be. But Aaron, how do you think that impacts opportunities for students and educators in rural areas? And how is the Rural Math Collaborative working to address this?
Well, the first thing, we're excited about being part of the panel, and the brief that was released by CSBA is just really just reminds us of the work that we're doing here at the RMC. So we're so excited about being here. But the first thing that I think of in reference to your question, Efrain, is that the core of the design principles, as we're designing trainings and professional learnings, we really need to be thinking of who are we designing for? And do we have the representation of all voices that will be impacted by the design at the design table from the beginning? And how are we going to validate the experiences of all engaged participants? And are we flexible enough as a design team to hear feedback and make changes? Those are some of the driving questions that we use in the RMC to make sure that we are actually designing for and creating experiences that can move systems to change in their mathematical instruction. I don't believe any one professional development opportunity was designed to not include a rural perspective. But as a result of centering just the urban systems, the unintended message that could be sent is your issues aren't real, your system is broken, or your school design is not effective because of what a rural perspective holds. A teacher, administrator, leader, community member in a rural setting faces very different challenges than in an urban setting. So in our RMC, we really define what our rural perspective. We really know that in a rural perspective, they could have multiple meanings depending on the location that you're actually in. And understanding these unique barriers of rural systems is what we're designing around. So we think about the multiple hats that people wear in a rural system, from the leader to the teacher, and the multitude of what they need to be handling and contributing to make their system viable and accessible to all within their community. So wearing multiple hats, an example would be our superintendent, who is also a principal, who also teaches the math class 1 period a day. So understanding that complexity is important in how to bring on and ramp on new learning for individuals that are in those positions. We also realize that in our rural perspective that systems are really stretched because of all of the demands that are placed upon that rural system. And we know that the rural remote makes it hard to reach all PD opportunities and collaboration outside of school. And we've really realized and pivoted in our design to offer Zoom experiences that we could actually connect more people. At first, we thought we wanted everything in person coming out of COVID, but what we realized is that is really what was needed in order to meet the needs of some of our rural settings that are extremely remote. And then the other piece that we are constantly thinking about is the retention of teachers that are teaching the mathematics now, in the sense that we have a bubble of teachers that are retiring in these communities, and therefore who's replacing them. And what we're realizing in the rural setting that we're in is that it's hard to attract young, new becoming teachers to come into our areas because there's not as much a social dynamic that's there. And so we're starting to support our PIPs and STIPs and interns that have not went through a teaching educated program. So how we create design supports in our rural area have to really be broad in our nature, in the sense of being usable and having things that are actually can be implemented from a teacher who is in the classroom that has had no education in the sense of instructional pedagogy, to the senior teacher that's joining us that has been in this system for several to 30 years. The RMC has intentionally centered students to accelerate mathematical learning and to increase learning among our rural educators. And we've designed our support by providing multiple entry points for teachers, like I said, that I've already mentioned, and administrators we've really targeted to join us on this mathematical journey, because we know it takes a team. It's not just the one teacher, but it takes a collaboration of administration and teachers to shift the culture of mathematical instruction in our systems. We've listened to the current rural systems when designing and adjusting the next steps of our work, and we're engaging with administrators, and we really appreciate in the brief, the January brief, the questions on page 5 for systems and administrators to review, because those are the types of questions that we meet with administrators that we ask, so that we can start providing space for change to happen. We also are building capacity, not only of the administrators, but the teachers and our COE partners and staff. We have 21 counties that are partners with us in the RMC work, so we can consistently support the learning needs of all students. And I agree with what Ellen and Kyndall have stated about the importance of coherence. Coherence is key. Alignment from the reason why there's a need for change, the how in making the change, and what are possible impacts for this change to occur. Consistency is the key, because a lot of times in our rural settings, everyone knows each other in so many levels that, oh, you're the teacher, but your dad used to be the principal and now your mom is on the school board. So you have a lot of not only school changes, but there are social dynamics that we need to consider in order to start shifting the culture and how we teach and support mathematical learning. So with that, Efrain, I'm just excited again about being here and the importance of being a collaborative partner. I do want to call out that with our RMC, we work really closely with the CCEE. We work with the California Math Projects because of our lesson study prong. We work with the 21 COEs across the state, and we work with CAMNY with our lesson study design. So RMC really focuses on 4 prongs of learning. One is lesson study, the other one is coaching, one is interventions, and then our 4th one is asynchronous modules of the framework. And we have resources on the CCEE website that you can access modules that can take you through the intent and behind the scenes of the framework. And we started with chapter 3 in that rollout. So again, I'm excited about being here, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. It's great to hear about all the work and effort going in, and obviously the work of the Rural Math Collaborative, CalMSCS, the California Math Project, and others is really coming together and really bringing that support to the masses. So it's exciting to hear about that. But now we get to pivot to my colleague Ali from Compton Unified, and it's kind of the idea of where the rubber meets the road. So we've heard from the folks who provide the support to the districts and the educators, but Makai has been leading Compton Unified through the last 3 years, and they've had some nice increases in terms of their ELA and math achievement, which has been fantastic. And we want to hear from you in terms of what advice do you have to your colleagues across the state to help cut through the noise and ensure that we can implement the new math framework in ways that will support the students. So I'll throw it over to you.
Thank you, and I'm very much pleased and honored to join such an esteemed group of intellectuals, cerebral thinkers in California. You guys are doing some exceptional work in your respective jurisdictions as well as organizations. And I simply wanted to highlight the work underway in Compton and provide just a glimpse into what we have going on by way of, number one, empowering teachers. You empower teachers in order to make decisions, but refine their teaching methodologies to meet the diverse needs of our students, as well as understanding our community. And so we start by targeted professional development. The board fully supports and funds strategies equipping teachers with the essential skills and strategies to enhance their mathematical instructional pedagogy, the instructional best practices to increase student achievement. In addition to that, we focus on and have doubled down on what we consider lather, rinse, repeat, right? And so teaching, assessing, and then reteaching math concepts, utilizing evidence-based instructional practices as well as data. And so when you empower teachers and provide them and equip them with the necessary skill set, then they will simply deliver what we need them to do by way of strengthening the instructional best practices and enhancing the student academic achievement, as well as shifting the culture and then continuously improving within the system. So again, that lather, rinse, repeat, but that's done by providing the necessary resources to ensure that you franchised your human capital. The days of being totalitarian and how you manage and lead systems, those days are long gone. You have to bring everyone into the tent, and if the table is not long enough, extend the table. But you have to be able to hear all voices and then develop that professional development strategy around needs assessment and identifying the specific needs of teachers through data analysis. And then you look at goal setting and how you work very closely with that needs assessment, and then of course, measurable goals for improving math instruction. And then you look at culturally alignment. You look at curriculum alignment, that CIA approach to professional development, which allows alignment of curriculum, instruction, and assessment with Common Core standards, and of course, district curricula and resources. And then you move into the targeted professional development and training. And so there has to be an intentional focus on developing foundational skills as well as fluency. And then, as was stated earlier, differentiated professional development offerings. They're available to meet the needs of that particular teacher. Oftentimes, remember, we're learning together. So the notion that we simply hire a teacher and that individual walks through the door already ready to go, well, that's the perfect world. But in many instances, there needs to be an intense enrichment and a strategy therein to ensure that we're meeting employees where they are at their respective levels. And so then you move on to coaching and mentoring. And so experienced math coaches and mentors are assigned to work with different teachers, directly helping that teacher to provide one-on-one support as well as guidance. And then lastly, you sustain that support. So when you make the investment from a policy and a pedagogical standpoint, you have to sustain that investment by ongoing support for teachers to ensure that they grow in their practice. And so through this various comprehensive, multifaceted approach, the district has seen growth, and we will continue to see growth, not just in math, but also in ELA.
Thank you, Makai. I think that the thing I'm hearing from you is that a lot of this is it's not by accident. It's some of it may be organic, but it's not by accident. It's very focused. And I think probably what resonates a lot of folks is the idea of the funds. You are putting money behind what you're talking about, and how do we actually provide the mentorship and the coaching and those pieces. So we really appreciate that.
Well, Efrain, let me just add one more point, my friend. It
Of
also
course.
requires courage. You can't be fearful of losing your job because you're going to double down on instructional best practice and a delivery model that will make adults uncomfortable. You have to be able to understand how to manage that LCAP, put in what you want, measure the deliverables, and continue sustaining that. Oftentimes, we're very concerned about our jobs as well as our political position. So we don't want to ruffle any feathers, but you can't become clean without agitation. And in Compton, 17 years on the school board, where the superintendent who's been there 13 years. We're very much focused, and the community stands behind us. The community embraces that which we have espoused since we took the leadership of this system. And many people understand and know the history of Compton going way back when, but we've since turned that curve. There's a new paradigm. We've shifted the focus as well as how individuals view us, because we've become not just a fiscally solvent system as well managed therein, but a system that is focused on instructional best practices and a methodology that ensures that all children can achieve irrespective of where they're from on either side of the border, or if in fact they're poor, has no bearing on the fact that poverty does not equate to being uneducable. What matters is adult behaviors, if in fact that intentionality is focused on uplifting students by way of instructional best practices.
That's excellent. I think courage is the main piece here. And to that point, 17 years, wow, congrats. And 13 years. I haven't seen the recent averages for superintendents, but I'm guessing 13 years beats that by a fair amount. And I think that the idea of the courage to fight for what we want, which is kids to be able to achieve and to achieve at a high level for mathematics and for all subjects as well. But having the courage to actually fight for that and get that done is powerful. So thank you so much for that. I think we're going to pivot over, Mary, to the Q&A. Do you want to take the lead on pushing this question out to everyone? Thank you so much.
Yes, so we also have questions that were submitted today into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you have not submitted a question yet and would like to add one, feel free to do so at this time. We'll begin with one of the questions, kind of has a few pieces. And Ellen, if you want to take this to start, and we can go to gallery view now so we can see everyone on the panel. How do we change the math culture currently? And what are some ways that board members can support this shift? Maybe even some communication strategies.
Yes, thank you. And I'm so glad that this conversation is at the center because it isn't just a technical change in this framework. It is a cultural change. It is a humanistic change. And so first and foremost, understanding that we are rehumanizing mathematics and building on what Makai had said about investing in the humans. The teachers who come to work in your district and your community have committed their life, their professional life, to this place. And the quality of their learning, the quality of the culture of their learning really is where that shift is. Most of us, as Kyndall had said earlier, did not have the opportunity to learn mathematics in this way. And those of us who did are just absolutely passionate about making that possible for each and every student. And so within that, we have to be, as we've already heard, courageous and vulnerable, and be willing to let go of some of the ways that we have used mathematics for power and for exclusion, and recognize and really take a look at all of the structures in the district, from how we place kids into classes, who we believe is allowed to take those classes. There are a lot of structural, instructional, and cultural features that you as board members can start with by, first of all, engaging in all of this work today, but asking those questions and supporting the administrators in your district. We did another webinar where we really dove into chapter 10 of the framework, and it really talks about the ways that both board members and your principals, superintendents, in some cases, those are the same people, but really investing in the leaders and the teachers, because the quality of their learning, the vulnerability that we can talk about mathematics, creates the conditions that they will recreate for your children in the classroom. And so I know my colleagues also want to add to that.
Yes, and I just want to say to one point that you raised, Ellen, around policies and particularly math placement. we have at CSBA recently updated our math placement sample policy that's available for all of CSBA's Gamut subscribers, and it is updated to really reflect ensuring practices research-based that are focused on appropriate and equitable math placement. So just a little pitch for that. Kyndall, I saw you unmute, so if you'd like to add.
Sure, and I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Ellen said. When we talk about changing the culture of math, I think that's what the chapter 2 of the framework is really getting at with the 3 dimensions of systemic change, right? So they're really trying to change the current system of mathematics education. And so we can start with the first one, an assets-based approach to instruction. So much of the current system of mathematics is a deficit-based approach to instruction. Which students are, what don't students know? Students are coming with so many gaps in their knowledge as opposed to what do students know, right? What are they bringing that we can build upon? And it's just part of it is changing a mindset. And so with each one of those 3 dimensions, I think that there are specific things that can be done, but it's choosing one of them at a time. Don't try to do too much at once, because cultures are, when I was in graduate school, I had a professor who said, the purpose of a culture is to remain the same while the world around you changes. And the culture of mathematics instruction that we are currently living with has been in place for over 100 years. And so it's going to take some really focused, explicit work to try to change that culture. And so we have to start with one thing and really kind of put some emphasis there, and then we can start moving out to some of the other dimensions that are talked about in the framework.
Thank you so much, Kyndall. Linda, would you like to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of things. One is, math is all around us, and if you see it and experience it in ways that make it clear how valuable it is, it changes your perspective, right? It's not just about how many answers did you get wrong on a theoretical, rote exercise. So we mentioned the Early Math Initiative, which is now Count, Play, Explore. Is that what it's now called? But it's for parents and teachers to think about all the ways in which math is around us and that it's everywhere, and then how it's joyful and playful and how you can really engage. And I think that's one of the kinds of things we should get parents as well as students involved in, because you'll hear people say, I'm not good at math. That's that culture that Kyndall just named, the idea that, well, you're not good at this, right? But the other piece is that in places like China and in some schools of education in the United States, teachers learn to teach math by going back through the elementary curriculum themselves and doing, having the opportunity to think through the ways in which they might solve a problem, and then share different ways of solving the problem, and then talk through how they thought about the problem, et cetera. And they begin to learn a different way of approaching mathematics that makes it also reinforces their own confidence in teaching it for meaning and teaching it for understanding and teaching it in ways that everyone has a voice in reasoning and communicating through the mathematical process. So we need that kind of professional development for teachers, those kinds of opportunities for parents. And I wanted to ask President Ali if he would also speak to what I've seen and described in Compton, where they've a part of their changes over these last few years have been STEM inspired in multiple ways, where kids are involved in so many applications of everything from robotics to, science experiments and a variety of other things that are drawing on the math for, real important and meaningful purposes. So do you want to speak to that a little bit? I think it's a
Yes.
really interesting phenomenon.
I'll take just a few seconds. So it's a very interesting point when all the critics talk about the application of math today. Real world applications are oftentimes missing. And so what we've tried to do in Compton is really work aggressively on the development of partnerships, aerospace and defense, construction, logistics. Many of the STEM-focused industries in our immediate vicinity so that we can then teach a student what it means to understand EBITDA or EBITDA, as well as what or to understand, okay, if in fact you have this higher level of math, what does it mean for you in the workplace? Okay, not just rote memorization or not just an overemphasis on memorization, which has been the issue in the past. So by franchising the community and then dispelling the fears of math, you oftentimes experience that many parents may not have a high level of math skill, irrespective of education as well as income. So how do you then dispel that? You bring them into the yearly STEM festival we host. Thousands of individuals throughout the entire school district. They converge on the STEM Fest or STEM Fest to be able to talk to all of your electric car manufacturers and all the other folks that we invited, a plethora of individuals. It's a phenomenal opportunity to engage. And so again, I keep going back to franchising, not just your employee base, being inclusive as far as the community is concerned, and staying away from the politics. Just focus on instruction. At the end of the day, every parent, that parent wants what's best for their child. And if in fact they see you care and they see you going above and beyond by providing all of the ancillary enhancements to the instructional day, they too will become part of the overall solution. And so, Dr. Darling Hammond, you're 100% correct. There's a host of initiatives that we undertake throughout the year. And then lastly, I got to say this. I just got to say the focus on concurrent enrollment and the early college at the middle school level, so that once they arrive to the collegiate environment, they're getting a sampling in high school, they'll perform better, which is why we're very proud of 50+ scholarships to the UC system because of the intentional focus on rigor. And so again, I tell you, 17 years on the board, I've seen a lot, but I can also tell you, we've come a very long way with focus on that which we know will transform this community.
Thank you so much. So as we are getting ready to wrap up, I think we have time for two more brief questions. So I'm going to ask about the question of assessment. So with new instructional approaches, districts and schools are naturally going to be considering the role of assessment as part of their approach. How can educators approach assessment in a way that supports improved instruction and avoids being too centered on test prep?
I'm going to offer one thought and hope others will offer others. One thing I will say, which starts from assessment and is not trying to avoid it, is that we have a process with the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium for our math assessments, where they are amending the assessments so that they will match to the new math framework, so that the assessment will be more aligned, and that will be coming to the state board very soon. A part of those assessments include performance tasks. And I know that one of the things that Compton does and many other districts do is use those performance tasks as part of the interim performance tasks that are available as part of the way that they're, sort of evaluating and supporting kids in learning in a deeper way, in an applied way, what the mathematics is. That is, in a sense, one might say it's a form of test prep, but in another sense, it's a form of using the kinds of applied strategies to solve problems more deeply than you might see if you were just sitting there with drilling the multiple choice questions that many test makers offer.
Right.
Ellen,
Ellen,
did you want?
Go ahead, Erin.
Well, I was just going to add on to that, the importance of the diagnostic assessment in the sense of really looking at the needs of your students right now and really creating that just-in-time balance. So you're, as teachers, really in tune to the learning that's happening in the room and keeping your eye on the grade level standard and really embracing that acceleration so that you're offering the scaffolds when needed but you're giving the opportunities for students to really succeed through your careful analysis of where they're at as a teacher.
Great.
And I'll just add to the diagnostic, something that is so beautifully woven throughout the framework is all of the strategies that are formative assessment as learning. And very similar to how do the teachers develop the skills to take the beginnings of student thinking and use that to build reasoning, understanding, the standards for mathematical practice. And those are really skillful things to do that are more than just your ability to compute mathematics. So that's one of the shifts that we are also seeing is less of this computer-based, multiple choice. And when you look at the Smarter Balance, the tests are good. They're not that, they're a good start. But that formative assessment as learning, teaching the reasoning skills, helping kids to develop mathematical justifications, the precision, the mathematical practices, that's the importance of this professional learning, because that's one of the most important shifts to get to those skills that President Ali had talked about.
And I'll just say briefly, the whole idea of mastery-based grading, where students have, number one, they understand what it takes to meet the standard that they're being assessed on, and they have multiple opportunities to show mastery. It's not just this one opportunity to show mastery and never get another opportunity again, but they have multiple opportunities over the course of a instructional time period to show mastery of a particular concept.
Great. I think we have about 2 minutes to address one last question, and then we have a couple of resources that we'd like to share. For those of you that have submitted questions that don't have written answers yet and that we don't get to you live, we will have a list of those and we will work on getting written responses to our participants, because we would like to address them. But for our last question, if you could briefly start with this, Kyndall. What best practices do we see throughout the state in building the capacity of math educators to become skilled and trained coaches that can work with their colleagues to create open, safe learning spaces for educators to provide each other with feedback and support from their peers?
Well, I think it starts with, really skilled teachers who have had success working with the students that they work with a diverse group of students that have deep content and pedagogical knowledge. And then there are multiple types of coaching out there. Personally, I was trained in cognitive coaching, but there are other models. But I think it's important that teachers get some kind of explicit training in a particular coaching model. And then it's giving them opportunities to engage in coaching, whether it's, partnering with someone else to practice the coaching and things like that. But I think that's what we have found to be effective in developing successful coaches. Right?
Thank you. And I think in the interest of time, we're going to have to stop our Q&A here. But I did want to ask if we could have our slide up with the resources so that folks know that you will be getting a copy of the recording and the slides. These all will have hyperlinks in them for you. So if you'd like to access these resources, they will be available in the slides. The first of which is CSBA has developed a web page specifically focused on all of our work around adopting instructional materials. And that includes our newest collaborative brief with LPI, the high quality professional development to support instructional materials adoption that are aligned with the new math framework. So we have a hyperlink to that. And LPI has a series of professional learning resources such as briefs, fact sheets, and reports. So you can access those through the links in the slides. following this presentation. I really want to say thank you so much to our panel for the time that you've taken today. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to us at research@csba.org. Our team will be able to forward the questions to the appropriate parties so that we can hopefully get a response for you. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.